Georgians will no doubt be soon overwhelmed with fancy TV ads, mailers, and radio spots attacking this common sense election reform measure.
In Georgia, they want to make it harder for folks to vote.
There's nothing crazy about this law. In fact, it's hard to believe it wasn't already on the books in Georgia. It should have been. But when it was proposed, it sailed through the State House.
So they used the muscle of the right-wing media conglomerate.
Maybe Atlanta, though, should just change their name to Beijing, Governor, because ultimately Major League Baseball has no problem with working with China.
And those leading the charge go on national television and they lie.
But you know, the end result was not, because it went through the process. We worked with the House, the Senate, with reasonable people, got things in there to provide even more access, but also just make sure that in Georgia it's easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Even with public arrests, the face of this bill, with the goal of disenfranchising thousands and thousands of voters so they remain in control of the state, continues the lie started by the 45th president with claims of voter fraud, even though folks in his own party and in that same state have repeatedly said there was none found. Which brings us to this: Augusta, Georgia, the home of the Masters.
Sports brings communities together.
This is Fred Ridley, chairman of Augusta National Golf Club, and he's a firm believer of sitting on his hands in times of crises. So Ridley spoke to the media and he addressed the bill.
There have been calls for boycotts and other punitive measures. Unfortunately, those actions often impose the greatest burdens on the most vulnerable in our society. And in this case, that includes our friends and neighbors here in Augusta, who are the very focus of the positive difference we are trying to make.
Now, way off. Dude missed a 2-footer with this remark. He also went on to say, I don't think that my opinion on this legislation should shape discussion. I just don't think that's going to be helpful to ultimately reaching a resolution. Oh no? You already did, my guy. In that very same presser, Ridley said, I believe, as does everyone in our organization, that the right to vote is fundamental in our democratic society. No one should be disadvantaged in exercising that right, and it is critical that all citizens have confidence in the electoral process. This is fundamental to who we are as people. What Ridley is doing is the fine art of both sides. He's basically the Larry David gif in the Rat Dog episode, but it's on the right to vote. Cameron Champ, a 25-year-old black golfer from Sacramento, said, as you can tell, it really targets certain black communities and makes it harder to vote, which to me, it's everyone's right to vote. For me to see that, it's very shocking. Anything that disadvantages anyone to vote is wrong and should be addressed, Ridley added on. Okay, let's address it then.
Anyone who opposes voter ID laws is encouraging voter fraud, which is to say, encouraging the destruction of democracy. It's that simple.
Thanks, small weenus energy man. Voter ID laws are not encouraging the destruction like this asset to white nationalist proclaims. As the ACLU writes, it's a method of disenfranchising American voters because getting an ID costs money. In effect, it reduces participation, basically limiting voters from being cast.
This is a country where the average person is getting poorer.
I agree, dumbass. So why would you make people spend money to vote? Many Americans do not have one of the forms of identification states acceptable for voting. These voters are disproportionately low income, racial and ethnic minorities, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Sans the cost, traveling to get an ID, whether low income or someone with a disability, makes it even harder. In Texas, some people have to drive 170 miles. Pulitzer Prize winner Douglas Blackman added, the most dangerous part of the Georgia voting law is that it removes from the state election board the vote of the Secretary of State, even though under Georgia Constitution, the Secretary of State oversees elections. It also puts the board under the control of the legislator. The GOP-led legislator is empowered to suspend county election officials. Runoff elections will happen faster and become harder to manage. So yeah, sorry to the masters straddling the fence. They're trying to get away with blanket statements. Unfortunately, that just ain't gonna cut it.